My dad and brother destroyed my life's work and got me institutionalized, so I took them down with a secret burner phone. 6 months later, my dad whispered, "It's not over." He was right, but not the way he thought. My brother Blake is a 28-year-old man-child who thinks getting a job means feeding the Matrix. So instead, he spends all his time playing Fortnite with random teenagers online and refuses to eat anything other than Popeyes. Meanwhile, I'm a junior in high school who's planning on growing up to be anything other than what Blake has become. And I was never good at math, history, any of that. There was only one talent that I was blessed with, and that was art. I first started when I was a child. It was my only outlet for how upset it made me when Blake was treated like some sort of king by my parents. My art teacher, Miss Thompson, and guidance counselor, Miss Thompson, ended up being my greatest supporters. They believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. So when they swore that I had a strong chance of getting into a top art school, I caved and finally applied. Because even though I personally thought my art was mid, everyone around me seems pretty impressed. I told my parents this, expecting them to give some sort of congratulations or even a hug. Instead, they just nodded and continued their conversation about work, but that's when I said the magic words. "This way, I can help fund Blake's lifestyle." The entire vibe of the room switched. "Honey, that's great. We are so proud of you," they both exclaimed practically in unison. That's when they volunteered for me to use the garage. I immediately moved all my art stuff in, including my canvases and old paintings I had. The next day, I was painting in the nook I had set up for myself when I heard the garage door open. "What the actual F? I just bought this motorcycle, so you're gonna have to take your little arts and crafts elsewhere." He tried to make his voice assertive, but I stopped taking him seriously a long time ago. So I sighed and told him that my art could make a lot of money, meaning he could keep avoiding the Matrix. Luckily this worked almost instantly, and he walked away with his shoulders slouched in defeat until last weekend when my next battle popped up. I was painting in the garage when my dad called and asked if I could buy the family groceries. Well, it was more like a demand since he was shouting at the top of his lungs. I knew there was no point arguing, so I abandoned my painting and left. I must have driven around to 4 different Aldas looking for the specific need he asked me to get because I knew if I came home with anything other than what he asked for, he'd let my brother wail on me. So 3 hours later when I finally got home and unpacked everything, I went back to my painting, but when I glanced over to my nook in the top left corner, it was empty, and in its place was the sorry excuse for a motorbike that Blake was crushing on. I pinched the bridge of my nose and tried to grab my paintings, consoling myself with the thought of relocating to my friend's house, but they were ruined. He had shoved them all to the floor face down, and the rainwater from our parents' car had absolutely soaked them through. I felt a rage crawl up my spine. Those pieces took a collective of over 200 hours. Like, they were my bread and butter and my key to get into art school. I thought about telling him off, about telling my parents, but then reality hit me. They wouldn't care. They never did. Suddenly, everything went silent, and I felt like I was the smallest person to ever exist. I cried so much my throat felt raw and my eyes swelled to double their size. "Mom," I said when I went inside. My voice was quiet, completely defeated. "Blake destroyed all my art stuff." I expected her to just shrug her shoulders, but no. "What?" she asked angrily. I didn't have time to say anything else because she stormed up to Blake's room and flung the door open. I obviously sat nearby to listen. "What the actual F were you thinking? That girl is our way out of the financial hole." For a while, there was silence. My entire body tensed up. That's when I heard it, the sound of a heavy book being flung across the room. "How dare you talk to me about that ugly bitch and her little dreams to make me feel bad? Get the F out." The door slammed, and outside, I could hear my mom silently sobbing into her flannel. My heart broke. That's when I finally realized my mom was just as scared of the angry man in our house as me. The next day at school, I went straight to the guidance counselor. But this time, it wasn't to talk about my art. It was to betray my entire family. I showed her the cuts all over my body and finally confessed they were from Blake and my dad. I told her about what happened last night. The paintings, my mom, everything laid out on the table. Her face went ghost white. "You can't go home tonight," she said, voice shaking. "What about my mom? Our priority has to be you, my love, but your mom will be safe soon." I nodded while wiping my tears with an old tissue. That night, I was placed into emergency foster care. I was told that the next morning, CPS would be raiding my house, but when they did, my mom denied anything ever happened, told them I was losing it. They played the part so well that CPS believed them without even talking to me first, and that's how I spent the next 6 months in a mental institution. 6 months of being medicated for problems I didn't have. The pills made my head foggy, my thoughts slow and disjointed. The white walls of my room seemed to close in on me each night. 6 months of therapy sessions where I was told I was projecting and creating false narratives. The therapist would sit across from me, his expression sympathetic but disbelieving, as I tried again and again to tell the truth. 6 months of watching my future slip away while Blake continued his consequence-free existence. I imagined him in my garage, lounging beside his precious moped, laughing at how easily he'd gotten rid of me. The thought made me sick. The only thing that kept me sane was a burner phone that my foster mom smuggled to me during her weekly visits. She came every Tuesday, bringing homemade cookies that the staff had to inspect before I could have them. "Record everything," she whispered during one visit, pressing the small phone into my hand beneath the table. "Every threat, every admission, it's the only way they'll believe you." So I did. I recorded the night nurse admitting she didn't think I belonged there. "Between you and me," she said one night while checking my vitals, "I've seen kids who need to be here. You're not one of them." I recorded my therapist's frustration when he couldn't find any actual signs of delusion. "Your cognitive tests are normal," he muttered, flipping through my file. "No history of psychosis or thought disorders." And when I was finally released, not because they believed me, but because insurance stopped paying, I had a plan. The burner phone felt heavy in my pocket, filled with evidence of the truth. The spring air felt almost shocking after months of recycled institution air. The colors of the outside world almost painfully vibrant. Mr. Thompson, my art teacher, lived in a small bungalow about 20 minutes from school. I'd never been there before, but Miss Thompson, my guidance counselor, had given me the address along with a bus schedule and enough money for the fare. The yard was overgrown with wildflowers instead of grass, and wind chimes hung from every available hook on the porch. Their gentle tinkling welcomed me as I approached, my heart pounding with uncertainty. It looked nothing like the pristine, suffocating house I just escaped. No perfectly manicured lawn, no gleaming surfaces hiding ugliness beneath. This place wore its character openly, unapologetically. "It's not much," he said, unlocking the front door, "but the spare room is yours for as long as you need it." The inside was cluttered but cozy. Books stacked on every surface, art on every wall, plants thriving in the sunlight that streamed through large windows. I stood frozen on his doorstep, clutching my hastily packed bag. The reality of what had just done hit me all at once. I'd left. Actually left. The institution. My family. The life I'd known. "Is this legal?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The last thing I wanted was to bring trouble to someone who was trying to help me. Mr. Finch's expression softened. "Miss Admos is handling the paperwork as we speak. You're 17, which gives us some flexibility. And with the evidence we have, plus the school's protection order." He trailed off, then smiled reassuringly. "Let's just say you won't be going back there unless you too." The spare room was small but bright with a twin bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a desk by the window. Sunlight danced across the hardwood floor, creating patterns that shifted with the swaying tree branches outside. No locks on the door, no shouting through the walls, no Blake. "Bathrooms down the hall," Mr. Finch said. "I'll be in the kitchen making dinner. Come out when you're ready." His footsteps retreated, leaving me alone in the peaceful quiet. Once alone, I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hands over the quilt. The fabric was soft and worn. Speaking of years of use and care, it felt surreal. This quiet room, this safe space. I pulled out the burner phone and stared at it. For the first time in months, I didn't need to record anything. The realization brought tears to my eyes. I unpacked my meager belongings, a few clothes, my toothbrush, and a sketchbook my mom had slipped into my bag when I was released. The gesture had surprised me. A small act of rebellion or perhaps apology. When I opened it, a folded note fell out. The paper was thin and creased as if it had been folded and unfolded many times before being placed in the sketchbook. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you or myself. Be better than me." No signature. No, "I love you." Just an acknowledgement of failure and a burden of expectation. The handwriting was shaky, revealing her state of mind as she wrote it. I folded it carefully and tucked it back into the sketchbook, unsure how to feel about this small, inadequate gesture. Dinner was homemade pasta with vegetables I couldn't name but tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months. The sauce was rich and flavorful, nothing like the bland institution food or the takeout that dominated our family meals. Mr. Finch didn't press me to talk. Just mentioned that Miss Thompson, my guidance counselor, would be stopping by tomorrow with Miss Moss to discuss next steps. "You should know," he said as he cleared our plates, the ceramic clinking softly against the sink. "Your art school applications are still active. I made some calls." His casual tone belied the significance of his words. I nearly dropped my water glass, but my portfolio, all my paintings were destroyed. The memory of the ruined canvases flashed in my mind. The hours of work dissolved into nothing. "We'll figure something out," he said simply, as if rebuilding my entire future from scratch was just another Tuesday for him. His confidence was both reassuring and overwhelming. That night, I slept without fear for the first time in years. The bed was comfortable, the room quiet except for the occasional car passing outside. No orderlies checking on me throughout the night, no Blake stomping around the house at all hours, just peace. Miss Art Thompson arrived the next morning with Ms. Moss, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a practical bun. She wore no makeup and carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had seen more courtrooms than I'd had hot meals. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct and assessing. "I've reviewed your evidence," she said without preamble, setting her briefcase on Mr. Finch's kitchen table. The wood was scarred with years of use, coffee rings and paint splatters telling the story of a life well lived. "It's compelling, the audio recordings especially." "What happens now?" I asked, my fingers nervously tracing the grain of the wooden table. The future stretched before me, uncertain and frightening despite my newfound freedom. "Now we file for emergency emancipation," she replied, pulling out a stack of forms. The papers looked intimidating, full of legal jargon and blank spaces waiting for my story. "With the school's protection order already in place, we have a foundation. The recordings provide evidence of an unsafe environment. Mr. Finch has agreed to serve as your temporary guardian until the hearing." My hands trembled as I signed where she indicated. Each signature felt like another step away from that house, from Blake, from my parents' expectations. The pen felt heavy in my hand, the responsibility of my own life suddenly very real. "What about my mom?" I asked quietly, She gave me the key to leave when I was released. She helped me escape. The memory of her pressing the house key into my palm, her eyes darting nervously toward my father's study was still vivid. Miss Moss' expression remained neutral. One act of assistance doesn't erase years of enabling abuse, but it does suggest she might be reaching her own breaking point. We can include that in our filing. Her tone was matter of fact, neither condemning nor excusing my mother's actions. As they discussed legal strategies, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The vibration against the table made me jump. My heart sank when I read it. "Where the hell are you? Dad's losing it. Come home now or things get worse for everyone." Blake. The familiar mixture of fear and anger rose in my throat. I showed the message to Miss Moss. "Don't respond," she advised. "In fact, let me see that phone." She took a photo of the message, then helped me block the number. "Document, but don't engage. That's our strategy." Her efficiency was reassuring, a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone anymore. Later that afternoon, Mr. Finch drove me to school to collect assignments I'd missed. The campus seemed different somehow, both familiar and strange after my time away. The hallways were empty, classes long finished for the day. The smell of floor cleaner and old books brought back memories of a life that seemed distant now. As we walked toward the art room, I spotted Madeline coming out of the library. Her bright red hair was unmistakable even from a distance. "Hey," she called, jogging over. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Her face was flushed, eyes wide with concern. "What's wrong?" I asked, noting her worried expression. Madeline wasn't one to overreact, which made her obvious distress all the more alarming. "Your brother was here," she said, glancing nervously at Mr. Finch. "He was asking everyone where you were, saying there was a family emergency. When no one knew, he started using your Instagram account to message people." Her words sent a chill down my spine. My stomach dropped. What? The idea of Blake invading my online space, pretending to be me, made me feel violated all over again. She pulled out her phone and showed me a direct message from my account. "Hey, I'm in serious trouble and need help. Can you tell me where Mr. Finch lives? It's an emergency." The message was time-stamped just an hour ago. I didn't respond, Madeline said. "It seemed weird. Then I saw him using a school computer in the library, logged into your accounts." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He looked really angry." Mr. Finch's expression darkened. "Let's go to the principal's office." Now his normally gentle voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Principal Winters was still there, surprisingly, catching up on paperwork. Her office smelled of coffee and the faint scent of her perfume. Her eyebrows shot up when Mr. Finch explained the situation. "This is a serious privacy violation," she said, reaching for her phone, "and potentially identity theft. I'll need to report this to our IT department immediately. Can you check which computer was used?" Mr. Finch asked. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his concerned face. 20 minutes later, we had confirmation. Blake had used a library computer to access my social media accounts. The IT specialist showed us the login records, pointing to the timestamp that matched Madeline's story, the IP address matched, and the school's secured cameras had caught him entering the building claiming to be picking me up. "We'll add this to the file," Miss Moss said when we called her. The phone speaker made her voice sound tinny but no less determined. "It demonstrates a pattern of controlling behavior and invasion of privacy. Don't post anything on your real accounts for now. In fact, we should probably have them temporarily suspended." That night, I created a new email address and sent messages to the art schools I'd applied to, explaining my situation and asking about portfolio alternatives. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before I began typing, trying to find the right words to explain how my work had been destroyed. It felt like throwing bottles into the ocean, hopeful messages that might never find their recipients. 3 days passed in relative calm. I attended school, stayed late in the library, and returned to Mr. Finch's house each evening. The routine was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. Miss Moss filed the emancipation paperwork and secured a hearing date for the following month, the legal wheels returning slowly but surely. I started a new painting in Mr. Finch's garage, which he'd cleared out for me to use as a studio space. Unlike my parents' garage, this one was clean and well lit, the proper ventilation and a small space heater to ward off spring chill. The blank canvas before me was both intimidating and exhilarating. A fresh start. Then my dad showed up at school. I was in English class when the office aide came to get me. We were discussing The Great Gatsby, the teacher's voice, a soothing background to my thoughts about color symbolism in the novel. "Your father's here to pick you up." "Something about a doctor's appointment?" The aide's innocent announcement shattered my sense of security. My blood ran cold. "I don't have an appointment." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, tight with fear. The other students glanced at me curiously. The aide looked confused. "He's in the office with Principal Winters right now." She shifted uncomfortably, sensing something was wrong but not understanding what. I texted Mr. Finch. 9/11. "Dad at school trying to take me." My hands shook so badly I had to type the message twice. The classroom suddenly felt like a trap. The door a potential entrance for the very person I was hiding from. His response was immediate. "Stay in class. Don't go to office. Miss T on her way." The quick reply was reassuring. Proof that I wasn't alone anymore. 5 minutes later, Miss Thompson appeared at the classroom door. Her face composed, but her eyes alert. "I need to borrow this student for a counseling session," she told my English teacher smoothly. The lie rolled off her tongue effortlessly, her professional demeanor giving no hint of the urgency behind her request. Instead of going to her office, She led me to a back entrance near the gym. The hallway smelled of floor wax and sweat, the sounds of a PE class echoing from behind closed doors. "Mr. Finch is pulling up now. Get in his car and go straight to Miss Moss's office. I'll handle your father." Her voice was calm but firm, a lifeline in my rising panic. "What's he going to do?" I asked, suddenly terrified for her. My father's temper was legendary, his ability to intimidate honed over years of practice. "His worst," she said grimly, "which isn't much against a protection order and a school full of witnesses. Go." She squeezed my shoulder once before turning back toward the main office. Mr. Finch was waiting in his ancient Volvo, engine running. The car smelled of coffee and old books, comfortingly familiar. I dove into the passenger seat, and we pulled away just as I spotted my dad storming out of the main entrance, his face contorted with rage. The sight of him made my heart race, but the growing distance between us helped me breathe again. "He can't just take me, can he?" I asked, watching the school disappear behind us. The streets passed in a blur as Mr. Finch drove quickly but carefully toward downtown. "Not anymore," Mr. Finch said firmly. "The protection order specifically prevents him from removing you from school premises without prior written authorization, which he doesn't have." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the only sign of his inner tension. Miss Moss was waiting for us at her office, a converted Victorian house downtown. The building was painted a soft gray with white trim, looking more like a home than a law office. She ushered us into a conference room where, to my surprise, a police officer was waiting. The room smelled of coffee and paper with large windows letting in the afternoon light. "This is Officer Reese." She introduced us. "He's here to take your statement about the social media impersonation and your father's attempt to remove you from school today." Officer Reese was younger than I expected. With kind eyes that contrasted with his serious expression, I spent the next hour recounting everything. Blake's text, the Instagram messages, my dad showing up unannounced. The words poured out of me, easier now with practice. Officer Reese took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification. His pen scratched against the notepad, the sound oddly comforting in the quiet room. "We'll be increasing patrols near both the school and Mr. Finch's residence," he said when I finished, "and I strongly recommend you get a temporary restraining order." His tone was professional but gentle, recognizing the gravity of the situation without adding to my fear. More paperwork, more signatures, more legal language that boiled down to stay away from me. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed document after document, each one a brick in the wall I was building between myself and my family. When we finally left Miss Moss's office, it was nearly dark. The streetlights had come on, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. Mr. Finch suggested picking up takeout, neither of us having the energy to cook. We decided on Thai food from a small restaurant near his house. The smell of spices filling the car as we drove home. As we pulled into his driveway, balancing bags of Thai food, I noticed something was wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible where there should have been only closed wood. Mr. Finch immediately put his arm out, stopping me from going further. The food bags crinkled as he set them on the hood of the car. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors." His voice was low and urgent. He pulled out his phone and stepped away to call the police. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, watching the dark house. The porch light was on, illuminating the wind chimes that now hung motionless in the still evening air. Had Blake found out where I was staying? Or was it my dad? The thought made my stomach clench with fear. I locked the doors as instructed, then sank down in the seat, making myself as small as possible, an old habit from years of trying to avoid notice. The police arrived within minutes, sweeping through the house with flashlights and drawn weapons, their voices carried across the yard, professional and terse as they cleared each room. When they emerged, their expressions were grim. Officer Reese approached the car, motioning for me to roll down the window. "Someone broke in," Officer Reese confirmed, approaching the car. "Ransacked the place pretty thoroughly, focusing on the spare bedroom. Nothing appears to be stolen," but his hesitation made my heart race. "But what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The night air felt cold against my face as I waited for his answer. "There's some damage you should see." His expression was sympathetic but direct, preparing me for something unpleasant. The spare room, my room, had been torn apart, clothes ripped from hangers, the mattress slashed open, drawers emptied onto the floor. The destruction was methodical, personal. But what made my knees buckle was the desk by the window. My new sketchbook had been shredded, the pages scattered and soaked with what smelled like beer. The liquid had seeped into the wood of the desk, leaving dark stains that would never completely fade. On the wall above, written in what looked like permanent marker, "Traitor." The black letters were large and jagged, taking up most of the wall. The sight of that word, that accusation made me feel sick, as if I had betrayed them by trying to escape, by seeking safety. "We'll dust for prints," Officer Reese said. But if they were careful, he didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew who had done this. Knelt to pick up a fragment of my sketchbook, a corner of a drawing I'd started of Mr. Finch's garden. The paper was soggy, the lines blur beyond recognition. "It was Blake," I said with certainty. "This is his handwriting." I recognized the distinctive way he formed his letters, the same handwriting I'd seen on notes left on my door, on threats slipped under my pillow. We couldn't stay there that night. Mr. Finch called Miss Thompson, who immediately offered her guest room. As we drove across town, I felt hollow, scraped out from the inside. The familiar feeling of violation settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. "I'm so sorry," Mr. Finch said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I should have considered security measures. His voice was thick with guilt and anger. It's not your fault, I said automatically. The part of me wanted to scream that nowhere was safe. The Blake would always find me, that this would never end. The word stuck in my throat, unsaid, but felt deeply. Miss Thompson lived in a modern apartment complex with security gates and cameras in the hallways. The building was well lit with a doorman who checked our IDs before allowing us up. Her spare room had a futon instead of a bed, but she made it up with fresh sheets and a fluffy comforter. The room smelled of lavender and clean linen, a stark contrast to the beer-soaked destruction we'd left behind. Just for tonight, she assured us. We'll figure out something more permanent tomorrow. She squeezed my shoulder gently before leaving me to settle in. I lay awake for hours, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. Every creak made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to move. The word traitor floated before my eyes whenever I closed them, accusing and threatening. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of Blake standing over me, marker in hand, writing traitor on my forehead while I couldn't move. I woke gasping. The sheets tangled around my legs like restraints. The next morning, Miss Moss arrived with grim news. She sat at Miss Thompson's kitchen table, her briefcase open before her. The morning light made the silver in her hair shine, highlighting the tired lines around her eyes. Your father has filed a countercomplaint claiming Mr. Finch has inappropriate influence over you and that you're mentally unstable. That's ridiculous, Mr. Finch sputtered. His coffee mug clattered against the table as he set it down too. I've done nothing but try to help this student escape an abusive situation. His indignation was palpable, his normally calm demeanor cracking under the strain. I know, Miss Moss said calmly, but we need to be strategic. These accusations combined with your recent hospitalization could complicate the emancipation hearing. She spread several documents on the table, pointing to highlighted sections that detailed my father's claims. So what do we do? I asked, feeling that familiar hollowness spreading through my chest. The taste of defeat was bitter in my mouth, a flavor I knew too well. We accelerate our timeline. The break-in at Mr. Finch's house actually works in our favor. It demonstrates the lengths your family will go to maintain control. I'm filing for an emergency hearing this afternoon. Her determination was reassuring, a counterpoint to my growing despair. While Mrs. Moss made calls, Mrs. Thompson helped me gather what remained of my belongings from Mr. Finch's house, now a crime scene. Yellow police tape crossed the front door, a stark reminder of the previous night's violation. The police had collected my torn sketchbook as evidence, which felt like losing my art all over again. Each page had represented a small piece of my new beginning, now destroyed just like my original portfolio. You'll make new art, Miss Thompson said gently, seeing my expression as we drove away. The street looked different in daylight, ordinary and peaceful, betraying no sign of the previous night's events. Better art even from a place of freedom rather than fear. Her words were meant to comfort, but the law still ached. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following morning. Miss Moss prepared me with possible questions, scenarios, and strategies. We sat in her office until late evening, going over every detail. The judge will likely speak to you privately, she explained. Be honest but composed. Don't let anger or fear overwhelm you. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing answers in my head. What if they didn't believe me? What if I had to go back? What if Blake was waiting? The question circled endlessly, keeping me awake until dawn began to lighten the sky outside Miss Thompson's guest room window. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble and echoes and people rushing importantly from room to room. My footsteps seemed too loud on the polished floor, my breathing too quick in the cavernous space. Miss Moss led me to a small conference room where we waited for our case to be called. Mr. Finch and Miss Thompson sat with us, providing silent support. Their presence was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. When the bailiff finally called my name, my legs felt like water. The sound echoed through the waiting area, making several heads turn. Mr. Moss squeezed my hand once before we entered the courtroom. The gesture was brief but reassuring, a small anchor in the storm. My parents were already there, sitting with a lawyer I didn't recognize. My dad wore a suit I'd never seen before, his hair neatly combed, looking nothing like the man who had threatened me in the car. This was his public face, the one he showed to the world while hiding his true nature behind closed doors. My mom sat beside him, eyes downcast, hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Blake was nowhere to be seen. Judge Ava Wong was a small woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Her black robe seemed to absorb the light around her, making her presence even more commanding. She reviewed the file in front of her, occasionally glancing up at me, then at my parents. The only sound in the courtroom was the soft rustle of papers and the distant ticking of a clock. This is an unusual case, she began. Her voice was clear and authoritative, filling the courtroom without seeming loud. I have evidence of potential abuse, countered by claims of mental instability. I have school protection orders and police reports of a break-in, and I have a minor seeking emancipation while the parents claim undue influence from school staff. She closed the file with a decisive movement. I'd like to speak with the minor privately. Her chambers were less intimidating than the courtroom. Bookshelves, a desk, comfortable chairs, family photos sat on her desk, showing a smiling woman with children of various ages. She gestured for me to sit in a leather chair across from her. The leather was soft and worn, molding to my shape as I sat rigidly, hands clasped to my lap. I want you to tell me in your own words why you believe emancipation is in your best interest, she said. Her tone was gentler here, away from the formality of the courtroom, but still direct. So I did. I told her about Blake's years of abuse, my father's enabling, my mother's fear. I described the constant walking on eggshells, the unpredictable explosions of violence, the systematic destruction of anything I cared about. I told her about the destroyed paintings, the mental institution, the burner phone recordings. My voice grew stronger as I spoke, the words flowing more easily now that I had practiced telling my story. I told her about Mr. Finch and Miss Thompson believing in me when no one else did, about how they saw potential in me beyond being Blake's support system or my parents' retirement plan, and I told her about the break-in, about seeing my new beginning shredded just like the old one. The word traitor seemed to hang in the air between us, unspoken but present. All I want, I finished, my voice steady despite the tears on my cheeks, is a chance to finish high school somewhere safe, to apply to art school, to have a future that isn't defined by fear. The words felt like a prayer, a hope I barely dared to hold. Judge Wang studied me for a long moment. Her gaze was assessing but not unkind, looking for truth in my expression. "Do you have any of these recordings with you?" she asked finally. I pulled out the burner phone and played one of the clearest ones. Blake screaming at our mother, threatening to burn the house down, calling me names that made Judge Wang's eyebrows rise. His voice filled the small room, the rage in it palpable even through the phone's tiny speaker. When it finished, she nodded once. "Thank you for your candor. Let's return to the courtroom." She stood straight in her robe with a practiced movement. Back in the courtroom, Judge Wang addressed all parties. The room felt tense, the air heavy with anticipation. "I've reviewed the evidence and spoken with the minor. Based on the documentation provided, including audio recordings that substantiate claims of a threatening home environment, I'm granting temporary emancipation pending a full hearing next month." My dad half rose from his seat, his face flushing with anger, but his lawyer pulled him back down. The movement was subtle but telling. Even here, in a courtroom, his first instinct was confrontation. Additionally, Judge Wang continued, her voice cutting through the murmurs that have begun, "I'm extending the school's protection order to include a temporary restraining order against both the father and the adult brother Blake. They are to remain at least 500 feet from the minor at all times and have no contact, direct or indirect." She turned to my mother. "Mrs. Thompson, while you are not named in the restraining order, I strongly suggest you consider your role in this situation. Enabling abuse is a form of abuse." The rebuke was gentle but firm, a challenge my mother seemed unable to meet as she nodded once, still not looking up. "As for living arrangements," Judge Wang continued, "given the recent break-in at Mr. Finch's residence and the accusations leveled against him, I'm ordering temporary placement in a supervised independent living program for minors. This will provide both safety and neutrality until the final hearing." It wasn't perfect. I'd be living in a group home rather than with Mr. Finch, but it was freedom. Real court-ordered freedom. The relief was so intense, it made me dizzy, a weight lifting that I hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. As we left the courtroom, my father brushed past me whispering, "This isn't over." His breath was hot against my ear, his cologne overwhelming. But for the first time, his words didn't terrify me. They just made me sad. Sad for the father he could have been, for the family we could have had. The independent living program was called New Horizons. It was a converted apartment building where each resident had their own small studio with a bathroom and shared kitchen and living spaces on each floor. The building was older but well-maintained with large windows and secure entrances. Most residents were older teens who had aged out of foster care or, like me, were in legal limbo. My unit was sparse but clean, a twin bed, a desk, a dresser, and a small bathroom. The walls were painted a neutral beige waiting to be personalized. The window overlooked a community garden where residents could grow vegetables and flowers. Raised beds contained early spring plantings, lettuce, peas, and herbs just beginning to sprout. It wasn't home, but it wasn't a cage either. My floor coordinator, Dennis, was a former social worker with kind eyes and a no bullcrap attitude. He was in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. "Rules are simple," he explained as he showed me around. The hallway smelled of clean products and faintly of someone's cooking. Curfew at 10 p.m. on weeknights, midnight on weekends. No substances, no alcohol, no overnight guests. You cook your own meals, do your own laundry, keep your space clean. We have group meetings on Sundays and individual check-ins twice a week. Questions? I shook my head, clutching the small bag of belongings I'd managed to salvage. Everything I owned now fit in a single backpack, a stark reminder of how much I left behind. Good. Oh, and there's an art room in the basement. Nothing fancy, but there's space to work if you need it. He mentioned it casually, not knowing how those words made my heart leap. I nearly hugged him. The art room was better than nothing fancy. It had decent lighting, tables, easels, and basic supplies donated by local arts organizations. The smell of paint and clay filled the space, familiar and comforting. It wasn't my ruined studio space in the garage, but it was something, a place to start over. That evening, I met some of the other residents in the communal kitchen. The space was large and functional with multiple cooking stations and a long table where people could eat together. Harper was 18 with blue hair and more piercings than I could count, aging out of foster care and saving for community college. She was making stir-fry, the smell of garlic and ginger filling the kitchen. Russell was 17 like me, tall and quiet, removed from his home after his father went to prison. He nodded a greeting but didn't say much, focused on the pasta he was boiling. Maria was 19, already taking classes at the local university while living at New Horizons until her dorm opened up in the fall. She sat at the table with textbooks spread around her, highlighting passages as she studied. They didn't ask why I was there, and I didn't volunteer the information. There was an unspoken understanding among all of us. We were there because somewhere else had failed us, but we were also there because we were survivors, finding our way forward despite those failures. The next day, I returned to school. Mr. Finch had arranged for a New Horizons staff member to drive me, ensuring I wouldn't have to take the bus where Blake might find me. The morning was bright and clear, school building looking somehow different now that I was returning to it from freedom rather than captivity. The whispers followed me through the hallways, rumors about my disappearance, my father showing up, the police at school. Students glanced at me curiously as I passed, their conversations pausing momentarily. I kept my head down and focused on catching up on missed assignments. The normalcy of schoolwork was comforting, a reminder that some parts of life continued regardless of personal drama. At lunch, Madeline sat beside me, sliding over an extra chocolate milk. The cafeteria was noisy as always, the smell of institutional food bringing back memories of the hospital. But Madeline's presence was grounding, a connection to my life before everything fell apart. "You okay?" she asked. Memories of the hospital. But Madeline's presence was grounding, a connection to my life before everything fell apart. "You okay?" she asked simply. No prying questions. No demands for gossip, just genuine concern. I nodded, grateful for her straightforward concern. Getting there. The chocolate milk was cold and sweet, a small pleasure and a complicated day. Good, because we have that chemistry test tomorrow, and I'm not prepared to fail it alone. Her joke made me smile, a reminder that normal teenage problems still existed alongside my extraordinary ones. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. It felt rusty, unfamiliar, but good, like stretching a muscle that hadn't been used in too long. After school, I headed to the art room. The familiar space welcomed me, the smell of paint and clay, a comfort after a day of navigating curious stares and whispered questions. Mr. Finch was waiting with a large flat package wrapped in brown paper. It sat on his desk, mysterious and promising. "What's this?" I asked. The paper crinkled under my fingers as I touched it hesitantly. "Open it," he said, smiling. His eyes were bright with anticipation, his usual calm demeanor giving way to excitement. Inside was a brand new portfolio case filled with heavyweight paper, professional-grade pencils, pastels, and a set of watercolors that cost more than I'd ever been able to afford. The supplies were arranged neatly, waiting to be used. I ran my fingers over them reverently, feeling the quality and potential in each item. "The art department pulled some resources," he explained, "and Miss Thompson may have mentioned your situation to the PTA Arts Committee." His casual tone belied the significance of the gift, not just supplies, but belief in my future. I ran my fingers over the supplies, speechless. The smooth surface of the watercolor paper, the perfect weight of the pencils, the rich pigments of the pastels, all tools to rebuild what had been taken from me. "Your portfolio for art school," he continued. "We can't get back what was destroyed, but we can help you create something new, better even." His confidence was infectious, making me believe that perhaps this was possible after all. For the next 3 weeks, I fell into a routine: school, art room, New Horizons. The days passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal after the chaos that had preceded it. Weekends in the basement art room, working on new pieces for my portfolio. The act of creation was healing, each stroke of the brush or pencil reclaiming a piece of myself that Blake had tried to destroy. Miss Moss prepared me for the final emancipation hearing. We met regularly in her office, going over possible questions and scenarios. Officer Reese checked in regularly, confirming that Blake and my father were respecting the restraining order. His presence was reassuring. I'm reminded that the system was, for once, working in my favor. My mother texted once from a number I didn't recognize. "Are you safe?" Just 3 words, but they contained so many unasked questions, so many unspoken apologies. I replied simply, "Yes." She didn't text again. I wondered if she was relieved or disappointed by my brief response. If she had hoped for forgiveness, I wasn't ready to give. The night before the final hearing, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small room, imagining all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. What if my parents convinced the judge I was unstable? What if Blake showed up despite the restraining order? The questions circled endlessly, wearing pads in my mind like I was wearing in the carpet. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and went down to the art room. The building was quiet, most residents already asleep. My footsteps echoed in the stairwell as I descended to the basement. Painting always calmed me, gave me a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. I was working on a new piece, a self-portrait of sorts, though not literal. It showed a figure emerging from darkness into light surrounded by broken chains. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it felt honest. Miss Thompson would probably call it heavy-handed symbolism, but it felt right. The brush moved almost of its own accord, my hands knowing what to create even as my mind raced with tomorrow's possibilities. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't hear the basement door open. Didn't notice anyone else in the room until a voice behind me said, "Still wasting time on that crap." The familiar voice froze my blood, stopping my heart for a hit before it raced into overdrive. "Blake." I whirled around, paintbrush clutched in my hand like a weapon. He stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, eyes bloodshot, hammered or high or both. His clothes were rumpled, his hair unwashed. He looked nothing like the confident bully who had terrorized me for years. Instead, he seemed diminished, desperate. "How did you find me?" I managed to ask. My voice steadier than I felt. The paintbrush dripped blue onto the floor, a spreading stain that matched the fear spreading through me. He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty room. "Followed that art teacher of yours. Figured he'd lead me to you eventually." He took a step forward, his movements uncoordinated. "You've really screwed things up. You know that? Dad lost his job because of your lies. Mom barely talks. And I'm supposed to move out by the end of the month." His voice rose with each accusation, bouncing off the concrete walls. "That's not my fault," I said, edging toward the supply cabinet where I knew there was a phone to call the front desk. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "You all made your choices." The words came out stronger than I expected, fueled by months of therapy and support. "Choices?" He spat. "You're the one who chose to betray your family, to make up stories, to ruin everything." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my skin, a familiar pain that triggered old fears. I reacted instinctively, throwing the jar of turpentine I'd been using to clean my brushes. It shattered at his feet, the strong-smelling liquid splashing his jeans and pooling on the floor. The sharp smell filled the room, acrid and dangerous. Blake froze, looking down at the spreading puddle, then back at me. His eyes narrowed, the calculation happening behind them that made my skin crawl. "You know how flammable that stuff is?" he asked, pulling a lighter from his pocket. The metal glinted in the fluorescent light, threatening and cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Blake, don't. There are other people in this building. Innocent people." The thought of Harper, Russell, Maria, and all the others sleeping upstairs made my fear sharper, more urgent. "Should have thought of that before you destroyed our family," he said, flicking the lighter. The small flame danced in the darkness between us, reflecting in his eyes and casting grotesque shadows on his face. I grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher from the wall. The metal was cool and heavy in my hands, solid and reassuring. "One more step, and I'll use this," I warned. "Not to hurt you, but to get the police involved. Arson attempt, violation of restraining order, breaking and entering." "How many years is that, Blake?" The legal terms Miss Moss had taught me flowed easily now. Weapons in their own right. He hesitated, the lighter still burning in his hand. The flame wavered slightly, mirroring his uncertainty. "And I've been recording this whole conversation." I lied, nodding toward my phone on the table behind me. "Just like I recorded everything else. Every threat, every time you hurt me, it's all documented." Blake's face contorted with rage, but I saw something else there too. Fear. For the first time in our lives, he was afraid of me, of what I could do to him. The realization was startling. A shift in power I hadn't expected. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice wavered. His confidence was cracking, the facade of control slipping. "Try me." I challenged my finger on the extinguisher's trigger. "I've got nothing left to lose. Can you say the same?" The words were calm, almost conversational, belying the terror coursing through me. For a long moment, we stood frozen in a standoff, the only sound our ragged breathing and the of the fluorescent lights. The turpentine fumes made my eyes water, adding to the surreal quality of the moment. Then Blake took a step back, closing the lighter with a decisive click. "This isn't over," he muttered, echoing our father's words from the courthouse. The threat sounded hollow now, a script he was following rather than a promise he could keep. "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "It's been over since the day you destroyed my paintings. You just didn't know it yet." The truth of those words settled over me, a revelation and a release. He backed toward the door, still glaring at me. "You'll regret this. All of it." His voice was bitter, the words familiar but powerless. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is not leaving sooner." The admission was as much for myself as for him, an acknowledgement of the time I'd lost to fear. When he was gone, I collapsed onto a stool, shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline that had sustained me drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. I called the front desk, then Officer Reese. By the time the police arrived, Blake was long gone, but the turpentine on the floor and the security cameras in the hallway provided enough evidence to issue an arrest warrant for violating the restraining order. I didn't sleep at all that night. Dennis stayed with me in the common room, making sure I wasn't alone while police officers patrolled outside the building. The night stretched endlessly, each sound making me jump, each shadow seeming to hide a threat. Miss Moss arranged for an emergency hearing first thing in the morning before our scheduled emancipation hearing. The courthouse seemed even more imposing in the early morning light, the marble columns casting long shadows across the entrance. Judge Wong listened gravely as Officer Reese described the incident, showing security footage of Blake entering the building and later fleeing. Her expression darkened as she watched the video, her mouth set in a firm line. "This is a serious violation," she said, turning to my parents and their lawyer. They looked smaller today, less confident than at the previous hearing. "Where's Blake Thompson now?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "We haven't seen him since last night. He didn't come home." His admission seemed to cost him an acknowledgement that he couldn't control his son any more than he could control me. Judge Wong's expression hardened. "I'm issuing a bench warrant for his arrest, and I'm extending the restraining order to include all members of the Thompson household, including you, Mrs. Thompson." The decision was swift and final, working no argument. My mother flinched but remained silent. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I wondered if she was afraid to go home, if Blake's rage had turned on her in my absence. "As for the emancipation hearing," Judge Wong continued, Given these developments, I see no reason to delay my decision. The evidence clearly shows that returning to the Thompson household would place this minor at significant risk. I'm granting full emancipation, effective immediately. She turned to me. You are now legally recognized as independent from your parents. This means you can make your own legal, medical, and financial decisions. It also means you are responsible for supporting yourself. Though I understand arrangements have been made for you to remain at New Horizons until graduation. Her tone softened slightly, acknowledging the weight of responsibility she was placing on my shoulders. I nodded, still processing her words. Independent. The concepts were both exhilarating and terrifying. A future wide open before me. As we left the courtroom, my father brushed past me, whispering, "This isn't over." His breath was hot against my ear, his cologne overwhelming. But for the first time, his words didn't terrify me. They just made me sad. Sad for the father he could have been, for the family we could have had. 3 days later, Mr. Finch brought news that changed everything. The State Arts Council is hosting a competition, he said, spreading a flyer on the table. The paper was bright blue, covered in images of previous winners' work. The grand prize is a full scholarship to the Midwest Arts Institute. One of the judges is an alum from the school you applied to. I stared at the flyer, hardly daring to hope. The deadline seemed impossibly close. The competition's surely fierce. When's the deadline? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. 2 weeks, he said. Just enough time to finish something spectacular. His confidence in me was unwavering, a foundation I could build on. I knew immediately what I would submit, not the self-portrait. That was too personal. Ruins of what Blake had destroyed. The idea came fully formed, a vision of transformation that matched my own journey. I asked Dennis to drive me to my parents' house during school hours when I knew they'd be gone. The restraining order prevented them from approaching me, not the other way around. Though Miss Moss had strongly advised against this visit, the neighborhood looked the same. Neat lawns, identical houses, an appearance of normalcy that hid so many secrets. "I'll wait in the car," Dennis said as we pulled up to the curb. 15 minutes, then I'm coming in after you." His concern was touching, a reminder that I had people looking out for me now. The house was silent, exactly as I remembered, yet somehow smaller. The familiar smell, a mixture of my mother's perfume, my father's cigarettes, and the lemon cleaner she used obsessively hit me as I entered, bringing back memories I'd tried to suppress. I went straight to the garage, half expecting to find it empty. Instead, my ruined canvases were still there, stacked against the wall where I'd left them months ago. They were even more damaged now, mold growing on some of the water-stained surfaces. I gathered as many as I could carry, not bothering to be quiet or careful. These broken pieces were mine, the only things from this house that had ever truly belonged to me. Back at New Horizons, I spread the damaged canvases on the floor of the art room. Water stains, tears, footprints, each mark told the story of that day, of Blake's cruelty and my despair. But looking at them now, I saw something else too. Possibility. For the next 2 weeks, I worked obsessively, cutting the canvases into fragments, arranging and rearranging them into a new whole. I added fresh paint where needed, incorporated the stains and damage where it served the composition. The process was cathartic, a physical manifestation of what I was doing with my life, taking broken pieces and creating something new and beautiful. Mr. Finch brought supplies, offered suggestions, reminded me to eat and sleep. His guidance was gentle but firm, helping me refine my vision without taking over. The other residents at New Horizons stopped by to watch, offering encouragement and sometimes helping with the more physical aspects of the work. The final piece was massive, a collage of destruction transformed into creation. From a distance, it showed a figure in flight, soaring above a landscape of chaos. Up close, you could see the damage, the tears, the stains, all integrated into the whole, necessary parts of the story rather than flaws to be hidden. I titled it, "Silence Doesn't Mean Gone," a reminder to myself as much as a statement to the world. The day of the competition, Mr. Finch and Miss Thompson helped me transport the unwieldy piece to the Arts Council building downtown. The building was modern and imposing, all glass and steel, filled with light. Other students milled around with their entries, paintings, sculptures, digital art, but none quite like mine. The diversity of work was inspiring, a reminder of how many ways there were to express oneself. As the judges made their rounds, one woman lingered in front of my piece longer than the others. She had silver hair cut in a sharp bob and wore all black. Her only color, a bright red scarf that seemed to float around her as she moved. She asked about my process, my inspiration, my plans for the future. Her questions were incisive, forcing me to articulate ideas I'd only felt intuitively. I answered honestly without mentioning Blake or my parents or the court hearings. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about transformation, about finding beauty in damage, about refusing to be defined by destruction. The woman nodded as I spoke, her eyes never leaving the piece. The announcement came 3 hours later. I stood in the crowd, Mr. Finch and Miss Thompson on either side of me, holding my breath as the head judge approached the microphone. The room fell silent, the tension palpable as everyone waited to hear the results. The grand prize of full scholarship to the Midwest Arts Institute goes to Silence Doesn't Mean Gone By. I didn't hear my name over the roaring in my ears, didn't feel my feet moving toward the stage, didn't register the applause or the certificate being pressed into my hands. All I could think was, I did it. I really did it. Afterward, the judge with the red scarf found me again. "I'm an alumna of the Institute," she said, handing me her card. The paper was thick and cream-colored, her name embossed in simple black letters. "And I sit on their admissions committee. We'd be honored to have you join us this fall." Her words were a promise, a future opening before me that I had never dared to imagine. That night, as I packed up my winning piece for transport back to New Horizons, my phone buzzed with a message from a private number. My heart raced until I opened it. "He's gone. Blake moved. I just wanted you to know. Be safe." My mother. No apology, no explanation, just information she thought I needed. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering if I should respond. What could I say? "Thank you for finally letting him go. Why didn't you protect me? I miss you despite everything." In the end, I simply blocked the number. Some silences were choices, not impositions. Miss Thompson drove me back to New Horizons, chatting excitedly about the scholarship, the institute, all the possibilities ahead. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. As we pulled into the parking lot, she turned to me with a serious expression. "You know, what happened today, winning that scholarship, that wasn't justice for what your family did to you." Her words were gentle but direct, acknowledging a truth I had been feeling but couldn't articulate. I nodded, surprised by her directness. The scholarship was a victory, but it didn't erase the pain or hold my abusers accountable. Justice would be Blake facing consequences for his actions. Your parents acknowledging their failures, the system actually protecting you when you needed it. She sighed, her breath fogging the window slightly. But sometimes life doesn't give us justice. Sometimes it just gives us a way forward. "Is that enough?" I asked quietly. The question had been haunting me. Was moving on without resolution, without acknowledgement, really healing, or just another form of silence? She smiled. A little sad, but also proud. "That's for you to decide. But from where I'm sitting, you've already done the hardest part. You've refused to let them define your future." Her words settled over me, a truth I needed to hear. As I climbed the stairs to my small room at New Horizons, I thought about her words, about justice versus moving forward, about silence versus speaking out. The hallway was quiet, most residents already in their rooms for the night. My footsteps echoed slightly on the linoleum, a solitary sound in the peaceful building. The truth was, justice hadn't come in a grand moment of vindication. It had come in quiet decisions. The decision to tell my guidance counselor, to record Blake's threats, to leave when my mother gave me the key, to transform destruction into art. Each small act of courage had been its own form of justice, a reclaiming of power that had been taken from me. And maybe the final justice was this: I was free, and they were still trapped. Blake and his anger, my father and his control, my mother and her fear. While I had a scholarship, a future, a life that belonged only to me, the realization wasn't triumphant or vengeful, just a quiet truth that brought its own form of peace. I unpacked my sketchbook, a new one, untouched by Blake's destruction, and began to draw. Not the past, not the pain, but the dorm room waiting for me at the institute, the studio spaces I'd seen in their brochure. The life I was building, canvas by canvas, choice by choice. Justice wasn't a grand event. It was the quiet decision to never go back, and that was